Hello and welcome back to our second demo video um, dealing with activity-based costing. So in this video, we're going to go through the 5 steps of implementing activity-based costing. Now, there's one thing you need to recognize before an activity-based costing system, excuse me, can be implemented into a company. Okay, this is not a it's a very um, long and very arduous process, okay, to implement activity-based costing into a company, right? How it works is normally we start off with an ABC implementation team, okay? What we do is we get the heads of all the overhead departments and we sit down and we talk to them and we come up with our activity cost pools. That's the first thing we do. Okay. So the first thing that we need to do in order to, bear with me, let me back up. First thing that we need to do again is to identify, okay, well, we got to set up our activity cost pools, right? We got to define the activities, we got to define those activity cost pools, and we got to figure out what should the activity measures be, okay? We're going to look at Baxter batteries, right? We make 2 types of batteries: short start, kind of standard run-of-the-mill battery, car battery, and then long life, which is maybe the deluxe battery. Okay, what we have here on our screen is the income statement, and notice that we have the manufacturing overhead kind of all just lumped into one, right? This is our traditional costing system. So we're going to take this information and we're going to create an activity-based costing system. Okay, so notice right off the bat, we're at a loss. Okay, and if you read through the book, hopefully you did that already. You know, they're losing money. Obviously they're $2 million in the hole, and you know, John and Tom and Susan, they start talking, and you know, what's the deal, why are we losing money? And then I forget who it is, I think it was Mary, says, hey, let's do an activity-based costing system. Great. So step one again is to identify what are, or define the activities, the activity cost pools, and what should we measure. Okay, so after a lot of interviewing you know, workers within various departments and department heads, they come up with 5 activities, right? We have customer orders, design changes, order size, customer relations, and then other. Well, that other is not applicable, right? See there it says, hey, not applicable. There's no activity measure here. We could assume, and we could assume with high certainty, that those are our organizational sustaining activities, or those idle capacity costs. Okay, so we identify the activity cost pools, which are nothing more than a bucket that are going to carry or hold the costs that are associated with that activity. So let's look at the activity measures, right? This is what's the cost driver, right? Basically is all we're identifying here. Well, the number of customer orders. Okay, that makes sense. We have costs associated with customer orders. What should drive those costs? Well, the number of customer orders. Great. Design changes, right? Design changes, those are product level activities, right? What would be a good driver to, or activity base, or excuse me, allocation base, that's what I meant to say, allocation base for these design change costs? Well, number of design changes. Okay, that makes sense. The order size. Well, we said that, you know what, order size, that's pretty much a unit level activity. So we're going to go with machine hours as an activity measure for that. Customer relations. Well, that's a customer level activity. Notice what the activity measure is. Hey, the number of active customers we have. Okay, great. So we did step one, which again was to define the activities, activity cost pools, and the activity measures. Okay. Step two, or we're still in step one here. I sorry, that's same thing we just talked about, right? The design changes, right? All the costs of the resources that are consumed by customer requested design changes, right? Well, what the hell does that mean? Well, I'm making Sure Start batteries, and maybe I want a Sure Start battery that has certain specifications, right? Maybe I want my store logo on the printed on the top of the battery. I don't know, some design change that the customer wants. Okay. So once we define our activities, the activity cost pools and the activity measures, we need to assign overhead costs to those activity cost pools. Okay. So notice what we have here. We have all of our overhead costs for Baxter batteries that are manufacturing as well as non-manufacturing. Okay. I might make you dizzy, but bear with me. Notice that total overhead cost is $22 million. Okay, that differs from the 14 million overhead costs that we have here, right? The reason why is because look what we're including. We're including the production department. Those are all our product costs. But we're also including our non-manufacturing costs as well. Things like administrative wages and salaries, office equipment depreciation, administrative building lease, right? By us making batteries, we're consuming these overhead costs. We need these costs to make batteries, right? Marketing department, sales, right? Marketing wages and salaries, selling expenses, okay? So, let me go back up. Notice what we don't have. We don't have direct material and we don't have direct labor. That's okay. Because ABC costing is trying to figure out how do we allocate overhead? What overhead costs do we incur to make a product? Well, we throw the rule book out the window and say we're going to include both manufacturing and non-manufacturing costs. Okay. The reason why we don't have direct labor and direct material is because our costing system, the traditional costing system, already easily and conveniently traces those costs to the product or the job or whatever. So that's why we're leaving those out. Okay. Okay, so the next part in assigning overhead costs, right? First we grab all our costs, which we saw on the last slide. Then the real work begins. We take all our activity cost pools, right? Which we said were customer orders, design changes, order size, customer relations, and that other. Okay, so we sit down with the production manager and we say, hey, you have all these overhead costs. We need to associate those with our activity cost pools. Okay, great. So I need to ask you a few questions. Production manager says, no problem. What's up? So we say to our production manager, based on your indirect factory wages that you have, right? We cannot easily and conveniently trace them to a specific unit or product. We know that because it's indirect. But if you had to guess about how much of their cost or how much of their time or how much of their cost goes towards filling customer orders. Well, they spend about 30% of the time or 30% of the time doing that, or 30% of their cost doing that. Okay. What about design changes? How much of their cost is incurred because we have a design change? Probably about 30%. Okay. We do that through each of those costs. Okay, factory equipment and depreciation. How much of that is consumed by preparing customer orders? Maybe 20%. Okay. We do the same thing with the general administrative department, right? We go to maybe the office manager and say, okay, out of all these administrative wages and salaries, how much of that cost is consumed by dealing with customer orders? Probably about 30%. Okay. So this is a very long and drawn out process in the real world. in academia, in our class, they're going to give us our percentages. They're going to tell us the percentage of time or the percentage of consumption of resources that go into each activity cost pool. Okay? So now all we do, we have all our information. All we do is plug and chug. Okay? So we know that the production manager told us that, hey, 30% of indirect factory wages go towards customer orders. Okay. We take our we take our total indirect factory wages of $6 million and we multiply that by 30%. So we're going to allocate 30% of that total cost to that activity cost pool of customer orders. Okay. We do the same thing with factory equipment and depreciation. Remember, in that interview, that production manager says, 20%. Okay. The total factory equipment and depreciation is $3.5 million. We're going to multiply that by 20%. That's $700 or $700,000. So $700,000 of that total cost gets allocated to the activity cost pool of customer orders. Okay, we do that all the way down and we get the total cost for each activity cost pool. Okay, if this is as clear as mud, don't worry, we're going to work on an example when we get to the study guides of this. Okay, but the main thing we're doing is taking our cost and multiplying it by the percentage of each activity cost pool or of each resource that is consumed by each activity cost pool. Okay, that's all we're doing. So that's how we get our total activity cost pool. Great. Next thing we got to do is we got to compute the activity rates for each cost pool. Super simple. Okay, so since we're going to step 3, calculate the activity rates, we need to know what activity do we expect, right? So again, we're going to use some estimates here, and we're going to say that, you know what, the team determined that we're going to have total activities for each of the following cost pools. We're going to have 10,000 customer orders for the year. Okay, great. We're going to have 4,000 design changes. Okay, we're going to use 800,000 machine hours, and we're going to serve 2,000 customers. So now, since we have the total cost for each activity cost pool and we have the measure for each activity cost pool, we can compute each cost pool's individual rates. All we do is divide, right? We take the activity rate of 10,000 customer orders and we divide that by the total activity cost of customer orders. That's all we do. Okay, so here's the chart, if you will, that we're going to use. Okay, so again, this is step 3, activity, calculating the activity rates. We take the total cost for each activity, right? Remember, we got that from this right here. Okay, and this is the step 2. Okay, so we take the totals from step 2 and we figure out what our activity cost rates are. Notice the total cost for customer orders, $4,520,000 divided by our total activity for customer orders, which is 10,000. We get an activity rate of $452 per order. Okay, we do that for each activity cost pool. Now, notice this other $6,160,000. What's the activity? Total activity? Not applicable. What's the activity rate? Not applicable. Okay, these are the organizational sustaining costs. We're not going to assign those to a product or to an order, to a customer, whatever. Okay, notice here the total costs equal $22 million. this is the same cost that we got from this slide. The total overhead costs at Baxter Batteries, okay? So now that we have the activity rates, we can go ahead and allocate, right? This is our second stage allocation, okay? Or I'm sorry, we're still in step 3, allocating activity rates. So remember, we said that direct materials, direct labor, and incidentally shipping costs are easily and conveniently traced to those cost objects, right? So they're not going to end up in our overhead or our activity-based costing system. So now we can do our second stage allocation, right? We already have the total overhead costs, meaning we did our first stage allocation, right? We figured out what's the total cost for each of the activity cost pools. We calculated our activity rates. Now we can do stage 2, which is actually allocating the overhead costs to the cost objects, okay? So let's see, how do we assign cost to cost objects using the second stage allocation? It's very easy, right? And let's build on what we already know. We already know the traditional method. We already know that I use this predetermined overhead rate, right? I take my estimated overhead, my estimated driver, I divide them, I get a rate, okay? We already looked at that. What's the word I'm looking for here? We already looked at that process from an ABC standpoint. Okay, well, instead of taking total manufacturing overhead, I got to develop these cost pools, and then I got to assign cost to the cost pools, and then I got to divide the or figure out what the activity measure is, right? And then I got to estimate that activity measure, and then I get a rate. I get 4 rates, right, under ABC costing, as opposed to 1 rate. So now we're going to apply, okay? It's very simple. If you remember and you understood how we applied the predetermined overhead rate to a job, we're doing the same exact thing, but this time we're using 4 overheads or 4 activity rates, okay? So let's see an example of that. So let's go with Sure Start, right? And let's just look at Sure Start just for now. We'll come back to Long Life. Sure Start requires no design resources. Okay, so right off the bat for Sure Start, I do not have to worry about allocating any design resources or I don't have to worry about allocating that design changes activity cost pool to Sure Start because it doesn't have any, right? 8,000 batteries are ordered. We have 4,000 separate orders. Each Sure Start requires 36 minutes of machine hours. That means that we're going to have a total machine hours for the year of $480,000. Okay, now we're going to apply. Remember, we're going to take the actual times the predetermined overhead rate. So if we were saying, let's say our predetermined overhead rate was $20, and we actually incurred, and it was based on machine hours, and we actually incurred 400 machine hours, we would take the 20 times the 400, right? And that's how we apply overhead. Here we're working in these, we're working with these activity cost pools. Okay, so we're going to apply the activity rate. Think of the predetermined overhead rates, same thing, but a little more detailed because we have 4, or actually three here, sorry, 3 different activities. Okay, we're going to take that rate and multiply it by the actual activity that job incurred. I'm up here in the green box. Okay, so customer orders, we already determined that the activity rate is $452 per order, right? How many orders do we have? 4,000. So that means that the cost, $452 times 4,000, gives us 1,808,000. For design changes, design changes are $760 per design change, right? That's the activity rate, 760. How many design changes does SureStart go through? Zero. We don't have any design changes. So we don't allocate any design change overhead to that. Order size. Well, we know that the activity rate for order size is $650. We multiply that by the actual activity of 480,000 machine hours, and we get $3,120,000. So we're saying now that the SureStart, just in overhead, is going to incur $4,928,000. We do the same thing for Long Life. Oh, sorry. We do the same thing for Long Life. Long Life, no new design changes. We make 400,000 batteries, 6,000 separate orders, 4,000 customer designs prepared. Each Long Life requires 48 machine hours, so we have a total of 320,000 machine hours. Oh, sorry, going the wrong way. So we do the same exact thing that we did for SureStart. We take the activity rates for each activity and we multiply it by the actual activity incurred. So we see that the total cost, or the total activity-based costing for Long Life, is $7,832,000. Now, if we take the $7.832 million and the $4.928 million and add them up, we're not at $22 million because we need to account for those costs that we did not assign, which is 22 million, or which is $9,240,000. So if we add the non-assigned cost, or the organizational sustaining costs, to the overhead costs that were assigned to SureStart and Long Life, we get our 22 million. Okay. Now we can do the same thing and assign overhead costs to a customer, right? We just look at a customer and say, okay, well, what did you buy, right? Well, we got 2,000 customers, but we're going to look at just one, Acme Auto. Okay. They placed a total of 12 orders. 4 orders were for Long Life, which required design changes. So they give us information, right? We had 8 orders for 60 SureStarts per order. We had 4 orders of 50 Long Life batteries per order. And again, those 4 orders did require a design change. And they give us the machine hours that were used to make the batteries for SureStart and the batteries for Long Life. Okay, we do the same exact thing that we did for the product, but we just apply it to a customer. Okay, customer order changes. We already know what the activity rate is. That's not going to change. It's 452. Great. How many orders did they have? Well, let's figure that out. They had 8 of SureStart and 4 of Long Life. If I add those up, that's 12 orders. This company made 12 orders with us. So 452 times 12, 5424. Okay, let's look at design changes. Well, we already know what the activity rate is. It's $760,000 or $760. Remember, they told us, oh, by the way, the 4 orders of Long Life, each of those required a design change. So 760 times 4 gives us $3,040. Now the order size. Well, how many batteries did they order? Well, 8 times 60, and then 4 times 50 gives us 448 batteries, right? We multiply that by the activity rate of order size, we get 2912. Same thing with customer relations. The customer relation, let me go back and find it. The activity rate for customer relations is $1,540 per customer. Well, we're just looking at one customer. So we got to take the activity rate times the activity. Well, it's one customer, so we're just going to multiply by 1. We get 1,540. So the total overhead cost, only the overhead portion, that we should assign to Acme, $12,916. Okay. We can also use this to compute product margin. Okay, very easy to do. Again, we take the to figure out what the product margin is, we take our sales, we add in our direct costs, which are very easily traced to each unit, so it doesn't enter the ABC assignment. In the past, we would say, okay, what is our manufacturing overhead? What's the applied overhead? We're in ABC, so we're going to use ABC to assign the costs of the overhead. The customer orders, the design changes, the order size. Okay? So we see that Sure Start gives us a higher product margin. Long Life does not. Okay? The sales of Long Life are a lot lower, but the costs are a lot higher with Long Life. Okay? We can do the same thing for a customer. Again, same exact thing that we do. The sales minus the costs gives us the customer margin. Okay? I did go over that pretty quickly. Again, calculating product margin, we've contribution margin, we've covered that last chapter, and I think we covered it, and I know we covered it in the CVP chapter. Okay. So when we come back, we're going to look at, and again, this other stuff is important. I expect you're just going to read it in the chapter, take notes on it, take note of it. I don't want to waste too much time getting into something that really we should be discussing face to face if we had that opportunity, and really talking about activity-based costing and how it differs for external reporting, and why a lot of companies don't use it, and what are the benefits and whatnot, and the drawbacks of ABC costing. You can pull that out of the book. I really want to get in I really wanted to go through the application of activity-based costing, walking through how we calculate it. We come back in our next video, we're going to go ahead and go through our demo videos. Okay, so tune back in for that one.